what's up? Awesome. It's great to have everyone here tonight. Hi, Julie. You're just hiding back there. This whole COVID thing, it's just great to see people out. Nice to see all the students here. So, when higher education was created, invented 934 years ago, it was done in part because we were trying to build young leaders who would become principled and caring experts. And at the same time, they would share this view of humanity that Jesus himself had. And so here in faith-based education, that's what we're trying to do. And we try to do that by having a vibrant intellectual life. And so tonight is actually a contribution to that effort that's been around 934 years. Now, our two guests aren't quite that old, but they're still able to make these kinds of contributions to us. So the topic tonight is economics. Is there anybody here that is not interested in economics? He's at that place where it means something different. Okay, so Professor, why don't you come up first? So our first expert right here in our own community is Professor Ezzie. So if you don't know him, you should. If you've never met him, you need to. If you haven't talked to him, don't leave tonight without doing so. So he came here as an alum. When he was here, he came from Lebanon. He was the only international student that we had. He spoke French. That works with the brothers. They all spoke French, yes. Right? So they would go, secret conversation with each other, and all the rest of the, students were probably not sure what you were going to say. So he began teaching here in 1969, and he taught here for 49 years. Five times he was selected as Educator of the Year. In fact, he's made such an imprint on our institution, on your institution, for our students, we renamed the Educator of the Year award after him. And he's still here with us to share with us his knowledge. So thank you, sir, so much to be here.
Thank you.
Is Natalie here tonight? His daughter is an 09 grad. Is she here? She's not here yet. Okay, so he's got daughters, and we can talk about all that later. All right, sir, could you join us as well? So also with us is the Honorable Jim Renaci. So Congressman Renacci served as a representative in the U.S. House of Representatives in the 16th District. But he's a volunteer firefighter. He's from Wadsworth, and over there he's on the Planning Commission, and he's also the mayor, Mr. Mayor. And so for our students, if you've been an elected official, then you hold the honorific of the honorable the rest of your life. And he did it several times. 3 terms in Congress, 2011, 4 terms in Congress, representing Ohio. And, no better person to talk about economics than Jim Renaci. Now, Jim has a passion for us only to be equaled by Joe's. He loves Walsh, he loves our mission, he loves what we stand for. He loves this idea that we're here to train leaders who will learn how to think, aren't really interested in being told what to think. So tonight, we look forward to the conversation and the ability to listen in on this tonight. So thank you both for sharing what you know with all of us. So how about a round of applause for our guests?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. This is going to be an interesting evening. You're going to get 2 perspectives because you have an economics professor and then you have a businessman. I was in business also for almost 35 years. And by the way, I took 4 economics classes in college. I hated economics, but I still love this guy. But it's interesting. Economics is interesting because I always remember that reason I didn't like economics is because I remember my first economics teacher telling me, well, there's nothing exact. If you push this lever or push that lever, anything can happen in the economy. And it's so true. It's one of the reasons why we have an economy that's kind of interesting right now, probably one of the most unique economies we could ever have. So what I'd like to do is start out, we have some questions, and Professor Ezzie and I had a great conversation just a couple nights ago, talking about a whole bunch of things. So we're going to weave some things in. You're going to have an opportunity to ask some questions. We're going to weave a little bit of politics in, but not political statements, just because as Professor Ezzie said to me on the phone, which is so true, it shouldn't be about Republicans and Democrats. It should be about Americans and the American way and the American economy. So I think that is so true. But let's start with a big question, because we know...
Can I say a few words, please?
Sure, absolutely.
I'm elated to be here in my institution, and I'm looking at the faces of my former students who are also alum. I'm so proud. That's economics. I'm so proud of being here. My friend, your career started at Walsh. When you applied for a job, they didn't ask you which high school you graduated from, what college or university you graduated from. Be proud that you are Walsh's alum. But tonight I want to share with you not my former students, but my fellow alum. Please be kind to this institution. This institution was found on holy ground. And be thankful you graduated from Walsh. Thank you.
So let's get started. Let's start with a big picture on economics. And I'm going to be asking Professor Ezzie some questions. And like I said, at the end, you'll have an opportunity to ask as well. But as we all know, we got an economy that's moving in all kinds of directions. Stock market going down, although today it was going up. Inflation rising. We got conflicts around the world. So, Professor Ezzie, is the United States in a recession? Is the global economy in a recession? And what does that mean for the United States?
Okay. Let me begin by simply saying, any system is a human-made system. Economics is a human-made system. Therefore, it has pros and cons. No doubt we'd love the pros, but we hate the cons. But we can do something about the cons. Yes, the U.S. economy is headed toward a recession. Now, what are the characteristics of a recession? First, a higher rate of unemployment. But someone may say, well, we have a rate of unemployment which is low, but it's beginning to increase. We have a high rate of inflation. Why? If you remember, my students, when we spoke of inflation, we said there are two types of inflation. One we call the demand pull, and one we call the cost push. In the history of the United States, these two occurred independently of each other. This is the first time they both occur simultaneously. Why? For the following reasons. The world economy consists of economies of countries that are interdependent on one another. Example, we depend on China for imports. We depend on Japan for imports. In other words, the United States now is known as an imported economy. COVID came upon us. And what happened during COVID? The rate of unemployment did not decrease. People continued to work from where? From home. Therefore, they began to realize some savings. They're not driving to work. They're saving on gas. They're working in their pajamas. They're working on clothing. They're not eating in dining rooms and in restaurants. They're saving on what? Food. So their savings went up, they have more money. And you and I know, my friends, as Americans, we love to spend. We love to spend. So they began demanding goods. As the demand went up, demand pull inflation, what does it mean? The prices will start going up. Now the savings is over. But every American has 2, 3 credit cards in their pockets. And the interest rate is low. They took advantage of that and they began what? Buying. The demand is increasing. Does it spill over to other economies, the question? And the answer is yes. When I mentioned a few seconds ago that the U.S. is an important country, specifically from China, so the imports also from China began to diminish. Why? Because of COVID also, which was a worldwide problem. Now, as we began to demand more and the prices began to go up, eventually we ran out of what? Our money. And what happened to the demand now is decreasing. If the demand increasing, that means unemployment is going to go up. Why? Because the demand comes from earning. The demand comes from income. And when the demand is decreasing, what you demand, someone else supply. Every demand is a supply. If the demand is going down, the supply must be what? Going down. And we begin to notice it's happening already in the countries that we import from. A global economy. The yesteryears are gone. There's no such thing as economy of X, economy of Y. It's the international economy. And we're becoming a countries who are highly dependent on one another. So are we going through a recession? Yes. How bad of a recession? I wish I would know. Is the inflation going up? Yes. What did we do about it? Congressman can tell you later on how Washington works. The Federal Reserve waited too long. We are people in this wonderful country. We don't plan. We don't take things into granted. We operate also in what? In the present. What are you going to do Saturday? Oh, I'll wait till Saturday. What are you going to have Monday? I'll wait till Monday. The present is already the past. The Federal Reserve waited a little bit too long. They should have increased the interest rate. And yet the Federal Reserve is not a political organization, but still subject to political pressure. So the inflation is going to continue to go up? Yes. For how long? I don't know. The rate of unemployment in the U.S. is going to go up. No doubt. It began already. Is the prices up? Yes. It is close to 9% now. I'm predicted it may go as high as 12% before it starts to go back down.
So that's kind of interesting, and I would agree. And here's and we're going to move on to a subject that's going to tie right into this because Professor Ezzie and I talked about this, and it's the national debt. So if you think about it, interest rates affect the national debt. The national debt is increasing very rapidly. There's spending going on, which I'm going to ask about, which is also driving inflation. Think about the things you just heard Professor Ezzie talk about: inflation, unemployment, and now let's zero into national debt. So what's interesting about national debt is that when I ran for Congress in 2009, the national debt was $10 trillion. And today we're almost at 30 trillion, might have crossed over 30 trillion. So since 2010 to today, we've tripled. Here's another thing that's interesting about the national debt. Remember that the national debt pays an interest rate. The interest rate was very, very low over the last 10 years. It's starting to increase at the same time, especially this past year as the Federal Reserve. One of the reasons why the Federal Reserve didn't want to jump in was because they knew the effect on the national debt. But today, a lot of people aren't aware of this. We bring in about $4.5 trillion in tax revenue every year. $1 trillion. People think, wow. And the biggest problem, though, I'm sorry, we spend $4.5 trillion every year. The federal government spends $4.5 trillion, but we only bring in $3.2 trillion in tax revenue. So every year, if we do absolutely nothing, we're running $1 trillion deficit. And a lot of people aren't aware of that. And then they say, well, why? Well, I also want to remind you that the biggest drivers of the debt, a lot of people don't want to hear this, are Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest. Those four issues right there make up almost the entire amount that we bring in. Because most people will say, well, if you want to fix the national debt, just cut spending. Well, you could cut everything other than Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest, and approximately you're still going to have a deficit. So we have this deficit that's continuing. We are now raising interest rates. And as you heard Professor Ezzie say, that we should have done that a long time ago. I think we should have done that 5-6 years ago. But I'd like to hear his thoughts on that. But at the same time, 1% increase in interest rates equals $1 trillion of debt over 10 years. So think about just this year, we raised it already over a point. We're automatically increasing our national debt. And remember the four drivers: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest. They are eating up almost the entire amount. So I want you to touch on that because we talked a little bit about that. Your thoughts on the national debt, your thoughts on interest?
The other contributor to the national debt, excuse me to say that, our foreign policy. For lack of a better word, our foreign policy, in my opinion, stinks. In the 1960s, 70s, we got involved in Vietnam. We spent trillions of dollars and we lost thousands of good people. What did we get out of it? Nothing. We went to Afghanistan. Trillions of dollars and thousands of people got killed. Do you remember that scene, that plane was leaving the airport? What did we get out of it? This money contributing to the national debt. Saddam Hussein was a dictator, no doubt. We got rid of him. We created a huge problem in the Middle East. Iran took the place. And now it's a religious war between the Shia and the Sunni. Is it costing us money? Yes. All of these are contributing to the national debt. The national debt is in the form of treasury notes. The federal government said, I owe you, and continue to pass the burden of the national debt to the future generation. You are the future generation. Who are most owners of the national debt overseas? China, Japan, Saudi Arabia. What scares me is the following. Could the Chinese use the national debt as a political instrument? What did Putin do in Russia? We owe China $1.3 trillion in bonds, national debt. What would prevent Xi of China says, I want my money now? How do we pay him? By issue another what? Bonds. But my friends, if the reputation of the United States emerged that the United States cannot make the payments on the bonds, who would buy the bonds? Could he use the debt as a political weapon? And the answer is yes, and he might. But pass it to the future generation. In my opinion, this is a crime. We don't have the guts from our politicians to the taxpayers. The taxpayers want more and more and more and pay, let me hear the word, less. How can you do that? The government wants to please the people, not representing the people. Congressman, you were a representative. Do they share with the people the honest truth? And once they get to Congress, and I want him to tell you what he went through, they're not representing people anymore. They're kissing asses. Excuse the term. And some of my students know how I speak. We need a better education. Education is not only giving a student a marketing degree or a finance degree. Education is to let the people differentiate between what is right and what is wrong. Robots can do better than a human being in marketing, but the robot doesn't think. My friends, you're young. It's the future. You are the United States. As the congressman said, think as an American. When you are overseas, they don't ask you, are you a Republican, Democrat? You don't respond, I'm a Democrat, Republican. You respond, I'm an American. And we're going to say a few words about education. Can I say it now? My daughter's been teaching for 15 years. Her salary is $40,000. Football player goes to university, never graduate, signs millions and millions of dollars. Which is more important? Isn't it the education? When we asked to build a stadium that will cost millions and millions, oh yeah, everybody, let's build it. Let's raise the salary of the average teacher. No. And the first day of classes this year in Canton, Ohio, they dismissed classes. You know why? Because it's too hot. There's no air conditioning in the classroom. But if you visit those who run the education, do they have air conditioning in their offices? Absolutely. Why? Why? Do we have the capacity to fund it? Yes. So we tend to simply pay attention to things that in the long run are not as important as the things that we call education. Education, my friend, as I said already, it is not receiving that degree. It is learning to make the right choice. It's to think and to become independent. When you become independent, you would walk with your head high and you don't bow for everyone. But we don't do. Your average coach makes 6 times as the average president of a university. Which is more important? I want you to think.
So we talked about this a little bit on the phone, and I think it's important. It's the education side of why we're in the position we're in today. I know Professor Ezzie wants me to tell you a little bit about what I learned in Congress, and I think that's important because it ties to the national debt. Then we're going to come back to the national debt. You know, when I got to Congress, I told you, my biggest concern was the national debt. It's $10 trillion. We got to stop it. One of the reasons I left is because I saw we weren't going to stop it. And I said, I'm not going to be a part of this anymore. In fact, one of the things I did was I put a bill out, which was to require, instead of the President of the United States coming to the House once a year and talking about the State of the Union, I wanted him to talk about the fiscal State of the Union. And so we had a bill called the Fiscal State of the Union Address. And I had leadership in Congress tell me, Renaci, we're not putting that out on the floor. If we tell the American people the fiscal situation of our country, the country will collapse. Bonds will collapse. Everything will collapse. The country will collapse. They said Standard & Poor's will rank us from a AA to a D. Everything will go south. So I was the type of guy that didn't believe hearing some of this stuff. So I flew to New York, met with the president of Standard & Poor's, and I said, do you have a balance sheet and a financial statement on the federal government? And they said, yes, we do. Can I see it? No, you can't. Because we have 65 people that work on that. And I said, do you think if we told the American people what the fiscal state of our country was, that our bond ratings would collapse? And he looked at me, and by the way, I said, you're going to laugh when I asked that question. He started laughing. He said, listen, we know what the fiscal state of the country is. The problem is, as bad as the United States is today, it's better than every other country around the world. The problem's going to exist when the United States is not as good as the other countries around the world, and that's when you're going to see a collapse of our economy. We're going to talk about that later, but these are the issues, and I know Professor Ezzie was very concerned about the debt and deficit, so I want to go back to that. We have an economy today which is in a recession. We have a couple of very unique things today. We have national debt at $30 trillion. We have interest rates starting to climb, which is going to also increase the national debt. We got unemployment going up, and yet we have business entities around the country, cities, states that are flush with cash. Why are they flush with cash? COVID. The federal government printed a whole bunch of money, added to the national debt. I can tell you there's a community in Ohio that used to have $6 or $7 million in a bank. Today has $75 million in a bank. I asked them, how did they get to $75 million? COVID money. So let's think about that. Interest rates going up, national debt skyrocketing, inflation, 8.5%, 9%. And now we got all these entities around this country flush with cash and have to spend money.
That's right.
Professor Ezzie,
Yep.
what is that recipe for?
Disaster.
Pretty simple answer.
You know what hurt me the most? I adopted this country. You don't realize how lucky you are living in this country. I was telling the congressman, this country recommended a study abroad. Dr. Bowie, remember this. And I was on the committee. And I said, where are we going to send our students abroad? He said, to Rome. I said, why don't you send them to Little Italy right in Cleveland? It's the same thing. What do you mean to Rome? Where do we should send them? Send them to Africa. Send them to part of Asia. Send them to places where they see how people live. And they come back and kiss the ground. Our representatives are not working on our behalf. They're working on someone else's behalf. What can I do about it? You're the voter. You're sending them over there. I'd like to say another word, which is important, also caused to the deficit. Social Security. You laugh when I say this. It was introduced in the 1930s by the FDR administration. And people will pay into it. When they retire, they will collect. But they come up with age 65 retirement. Why? Because in the 1930s, the longevity age was 68. So the amount of money the people paid in was good enough for them to collect for 3 or 4 years. The longevity age now is 78 for men and 80 for women. Always women live longer. But yet, the retirement age is still about the same, or they raised it to 66 and a half. I want to tell them about your dad. The amount of money we pay into the Social Security when we are working is not the same amount we collect. So how do we collect our money? The government. The average person do not understand, this is my money, I want it. That should be taken into consideration. We have some recommendation. You and I talk about this. Why a billionaire must earn Social Security benefits? Why don't we come up with a program evaluating on the basis of income? If someone's making $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, and now he or she retired, why should they collect? But that's my money. I contributed to it. Well, you pay taxes, don't you? Yes. Do you ask for the taxes to get back to you? All of these, my friends, are causing problems to this wonderful economy, which is the best in the world. The best in the world. But we're ignoring it. And we're leaving it in the hand of individuals or representative, quote unquote, don't give a damn about you or me. They work for other reasons. The Social Security will go bankrupt. But since it's a law, the government would borrow and pay for it. There are ways to do it. Why don't we increase the retirement age to 70? But you have to tell the people the truth. Tell the people the reality. It is very hard sometimes, but that's how it is. Our national debt is a problem. And you can guarantee, I may be dead, this guy had said it. Some of the politicians overseas will use it as a weapon against the U.S., which will force U.S. to pay for it. How? By printing money. And printing money would lead to what? Let me hear it. Higher inflation.
Well, what's interesting is...
Tell them about your dad, Congressman.
Yeah. So I was telling Professor Ezzie, my dad, when I first got to Congress, said, don't you touch my Social Security. Now, God bless my dad, he passed away at 88, but what I told him one day was, Dad, I calculate how much you put into Social Security from the day it started until the day I was talking to him. I said, you put about 100,000 in. I said, and if you, even if I triple that over 20 or 30 years, that's 300,000. But you've taken out much, much more than that from the age 62, which is when he started taking benefits, to 88. So the problem is we just don't recognize it. If we, remember, Social Security was supposed to be a supplement, not a retirement. Social Security supplemental income. Too many people believe it is a retirement benefit. It was supposed to be a supplement. So when I was in Congress, I will tell you the biggest thing, don't you touch my Social Security. Another issue that is driving the debt too, especially for the younger generation here, is that Medicare, the average couple, we used to have all these statistics in Congress, pays about $320,000 in their lifetime into Medicare, but they take out about $600,000 or $700,000 in benefits. There's not a program in the world where you put in $1 and take out $2 that survives. So Medicare is another problem. So this deficit, and that's what scares me more than anything when we think of the economy. We have a deficit that's going to continue to grow until somebody wises up and says, we got to fix the main drivers, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest. Those are the main drivers. They're going up at a rapid pace. There's another reason for that, by the way. We have less and less people working and more people taking the benefit. When Social Security first started, you had 19 people paying in to 3 people taken out. Today you have 3 people paying in to 19 people taken out. It's almost reversed. Another economic disaster heading for our country. So again, the national debt, interest rates, inflation, all of this spending. I don't know how you get inflation. That'd be my next question for you. We've got all this spending. We've got all these cities with money, all these entities with money. How are we going to bring inflation down? What do we do to bring inflation down?
Inflation is an evil, and unemployment is an evil. As a consequence of each, as I started already, I said economic system is a human-made system. It's always subject to what? Mistakes and errors. The economy would say if we have 2 evils, one we call unemployment that affects the few who are unemployed. And regardless how high the rate of unemployment is, the rate of employment is larger. If I say 15% rate of unemployment, I'm saying 85% are working. So unemployment affects the few, but inflation affects the whole. So we have to make a choice. And we call it in economics the lesser of the 2 evils. If you want to cure inflation, you have to accept unemployment. Why? Because one type of inflation is caused by the demand. I call it demand what? Demand pull. And the demand means you got money, whether it's on credit or whatever. You have to accept the lesser of the 2 evils. But X is unemployed. That's okay, but he's supplemented. He receives unemployment compensation. So he's not losing 100%. If we leave the things the way they are, the economy is going to go bankrupt because the inflation will destroy the whole economy. How? It will contribute to higher cost. If you're buying wood to build a house and the prices of wood is going what? Up. What's going to happen to the cost of building the house? It's going to go up. And one would lead to the other. You also need what? Steel to build the house. And the cost of steel is what? Going up. So one would lead to the other. You have to make a decision. You have 2 evils on hand. Accept the lesser of the 2 evils. By causing unemployment? Yes. It is very hard what? To fathom it. You telling me that I have to lose my job? Yes. For better than the whole. Well, you need people with guts and people with commitment to make this decision. It can be solved. It did before, and it will. You have an economic system that has theories, that has principles, that has science, that is proven. If you apply it without any what? Interference, it will work. It will work. But now, I'm Congressman from Ohio. Don't you dare do it at the expense of Ohio. I'm a congressman from Pennsylvania. Don't you dare do it at the expense of what? Pennsylvania. And we go to the whole 50 states. Who's going to pay? Canada? The answer is there. Economics is a science. If you go to the doctor, which is another science, do they have the cure? And the answer is what? Yes. We do have the cure in economics. It's a big difference. You have to apply the cure. You go to the doctor, he gives a prescription, but if you don't take it, but you have the guts to apply the use. And you have to think as an American, not because I'm a Republican and I will hurt the Republican Party, I'm independent, I will hurt the Independent Party. That's why I told you, think as an American. And if America is good, then the Republican and the Democrat Party will also be good.
So I got to ask you another question in that regard then, because I think what you just said, so politicians, they want to come out and report low inflation and low unemployment. The problem is you can't lower, what you're saying is you can't lower inflation without increasing unemployment.
Exactly. You have to accept the lesser of the two evils.
Sure.
We watch the news, Congressman, now, and there are people running for Congress, right? What do they tell people? They think we're stupid.
They tell them we're going to give you a job and they're going to get inflation down. Well, that's not the answer.
They think we're stupid. And I got mad as hell when I watched this. You making fun of me? They should be told, I'm not that stupid.
What's an interesting point. And that's very interesting, because what you're saying is exactly what our political Republicans and Democrats are saying different. They are saying, I'm going to bring you jobs and I'm going to bring inflation down. And what I'm hearing is unemployment has to go up for inflation to come down. The demand has to go down. Now, the other problem we have, though, is you've got all this built-in cash I told you that entities have. Well, that's going to continue to cause demand.
Sure, because now they're forced to spend it. Because if they don't spend it, they have to give it back to the government. They're not going to do that.
Right.
And if you're forced to spend it, what are you doing? You're enhancing the demand. You're increasing the demand. Because if I don't spend it, the government wants it back from me. So the government make the first mistake by giving it.
And adding to the national debt.
Well, absolutely.
So if you think about where we're at, this is the scary thing about our economy today. We have all this pent-up cash. The states, our state of Ohio is flooded with cash. Our cities are flooded with cash. And they're spending. And then we've got unemployment, which is low, and the politicians are all saying, we're going to keep it low. It sounds like none of this there's no solution.
The politicians do not run the economy. The economy consists of businesses, workers, etc. The politicians sometimes screw it up. And they know. Why? Because that's not what the public like to hear. I'm going to look at the campaign between Ryan and Vance. What are they telling you? He was going to hire 700,000 people into the IRS. Do you have any say in hiring to the IRS, Congressman? And yet the people will believe that. That's why we need to be educated. Let's have to be, he says, not to be afraid. Shut up. Tell me the truth. Don't make fun of me.
We're going to switch gears now to the housing market, because as most of you know, the economy was booming over the last few years because the housing market was booming. Houses all across the country. In Florida, there were 100% increase in value. Anywhere where there was demand, values were skyrocketing. Now we have the Federal Reserve increasing interest rates, which that Fed policy of raising interest rates, will it hurt the housing market?
It will hurt the housing market because the houses are bought on a mortgage. You're not paying cash for the house. So the average person, before they simply look at buying the house, the first they want to know, what would my monthly payment be? That's the number one concern. What is my monthly payment be? And I simply work, around so I have to pay X number of dollars for food, X number of dollars for car, et cetera, et cetera. Now, can I afford $700 monthly payment on the mortgage? Why $700? Because the interest rate is X. If the interest rate goes up, the $700 is going to go up to $1,000. If I want to pay $1,000, I have to take the money from something else. And that's not going to work. So the interest rate is very, very important in the housing market because houses are not bought for cash, they're bought on credits. And as the interest rate to go up, the demand for housing will start to go down. Which is, by the way, the most important sector in our economy is housing. And that's why I want to touch something else. Some of you may remember when you had me in class, talk about the student loans. And I used to tell you, if I'm the government, I will forgive the student loans right now. Why? An average student wants to simply specialize in a major, go to university, and end up owing $100,000, $120,000. Why? Education is not important. It's more important than national defense, in my opinion. And if we forgive the student loans, go back to the market housing, where would this student after graduating like to spend his or her money? I want to get out of my parents' house. I want to buy what? My own house. And that would be economic growth. Now, President Biden forgave $10,000. What's $10,000? You can't even buy half a car. And the timing was wrong because he proposed it during what? Inflationary time. The time is wrong. Why should our students pay that much money for education?
But you do agree that it should not be forgiven now because the timing is wrong because we're in an inflationary.
Exactly. But period, my point is this. The students should not pay for education, period. The government, if it's a private institution, the government should supplement it. If it's a public institution, even when we go to public universities, the students paying what? Tuition. I said earlier, education is a necessity. We call it in economics inelastic demand. Meaning it's a necessity. Therefore, the tuition's money should be actually counted. And this will promote economic growth because the people who graduate, the first thing, they meet each other, they have lovely friends that they met in college, they get married, and the first thing they want is to buy a house. But now, when the student is graduating with $100,000 in deficit, he's going back and living where? With his or her parents. And it's not contributing to economic growth.
Let me ask you this from an economic standpoint. Should the student get a class before they go to college that says you shouldn't borrow $300,000 if you're going to go into a program that's only going to pay you $30,000? Should there be some education on that too? Because sometimes students go out and borrow way too much money, knowing and the job they're going to get doesn't pay enough to ever pay that loan back.
But I don't want to deter the students from not going to college.
I agree with
I
that.
want to encourage students going and specialize and so on and so forth, because the productivity will go up and so on and so forth. Now, if you simply meet with that student who says, do this and don't do this, and well, let me see now, I'm scared to go to college, what would that do? We should encourage students to go to college. and receive this measure and receive this know-how. But don't burden him with a couple $100,000 in debt. It doesn't make any sense. Where? In the richest economy in the world. So I think we're spending the money in different other places, which is not giving us a wonderful rate of return. Don't take me wrong, I am for democracy. How many millions and billions of dollars we spent supporting Ukraine already?
I was going to ask you that question next. We have foreign policy that affects our U.S. economy. What was the impact of the Russian invasion? First off, what was the impact on the United States economy with the invasion of Ukraine?
I said this already, Congressman, because today now we have what we call interdependent economies. So because the economic world was in peace, we trusted Russia is good in the production of natural gas, let it specialize in natural gas, and the United States is good in the production of X, let it specialize in this, and they trade among each other. So what happened is that Europe becomes dependent on Russia. And now Putin knew that very well. If you depend on me, and by the way, I don't give a damn about my people, how do I hurt you? By not sending you gas. So we have to be very careful here. It's nice to specialize. It's nice to become independent. But when you talk about a country, it is sometimes, even if it costs you a little bit more to produce it locally, will make you more independent. Okay? What happens if China will block all of this import that we bring from China? What would happen to the U.S. consumer? By the way, we live from one day to the other, isn't it? Do we panic? We listen to the hurricane that is taking place. What is going on in the stores? The shelves are what? Empty. I saw a cart with 15, 20 cases of water. Because we're accustomed to plentiful things, and we are so scared when we hear the word what? Scarcity. That's the problem. And that's what I'm worried about. Now, Putin wants to claim part of the Ukraine. Isn't China interested in bringing back Taiwan? Let us suppose that China did the same thing as Putin did. I'll let you answer that.
Well, so think about all this. We're all doom and gloom, which I think in some ways we should be. We do have an economy. We have the United States economy, which is the greatest in the world. I think you would agree with that.
There's no equal. This is the greatest economy in the world. If you don't believe me, visit other countries. I don't want to live any other place except the United States. And I've been across the world except Asia. Trust me. You don't want to be any other place.
So have we ever been in an economy where we've got the national debt where it's at, we've got inflation somewhere around 8.5%, we've got unemployment at the lowest, some of the lowest levels ever, and we got interest rates at below market rates as well. Have we ever seen that before?
No, that's what I said earlier, because I think COVID contributed to that quite a bit. Before, when we had inflation, the rate of unemployment was low. We curbed inflation down. We raised the rate of unemployment so that we accepted what? This will pass. This will pass. And I think sometimes, if I may use an analogy, it is good to be sick for a while so you can appreciate your health. So we should learn from this. It will pass. At what cost? Yes, no doubt, there's a cost. But it will pass. But my point, my friends, let's learn from it. Let's not forget it. Oh, it's not going to come back. It's gone. It's the United States and so on and so forth. Let's learn from it. It will pass. How long it will take? I don't know. the rate of unemployment began to increase. It was 3.8, it's 4.2 now. The price index is up to 8.6, and it is going up. How high? I'm predicting it might reach 12 to 13% before it starts to curve down.
Now, when inflation gets to 12%, unemployment's going to go up as well.
Sure.
Because businesses can't afford, and interest rates go up, businesses are going to have to cut back somewhere, right?
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's going to
And the business will cut from where? They will not cut, think that they already invested in it because they committed themselves to it. So the labor would be the first good. And don't forget also, we are in a highly economy that is subject to invention, innovations, and so forth. So the human labor could be a substitute, or the robot could be a substitute for human labor. But this is a big mistake, too, on the part of what the business is. Well, I don't need you. I can have a robot do your job and so forth. But the robot does not buy food. The robot does not buy clothing. The robot can only produce, but is not a demand. So if management continue to think that way, they're cutting their own throat. You're producing, but you don't see the robots buying. And if you keep laying off individuals, it's the people who buy, it's not the robots. So we also need commitments on the part of businesses as well. You have two parties. They need each other. They depend on one another. And the best thing is to work together, not to alienate one another. It's like a wonderful marriage.
So if interest rates are going up, supply chains costs are going up.
Exactly.
And then you've got scarcity employment. By the way, what do you think is driving the scarcity of employment? Today, I've heard numbers that there's X millions of jobs available and twice as many viable employers. What's causing the scarcity of employment?
I think COVID hit the United States suddenly, and this generation has been without this kind of a malady for a long, long time. We read in the paper, the plague and so on and so forth, but happened a long time ago. So it created, I think, a scare. I don't want to go to work. And if I don't go to work, and so on. So this created people who are scared they don't go to work. Besides, the wage for the jobs is restaurants. We're hiring. How much do you pay? I'd rather be home and collect from the government rather than work for $7 or $8. Minimum wage, $16. What can you do with the $16 when the prices are going up? So how would you lure people to work? You have to lure people by paying them what? More. But if I pay them more, I have to raise the prices. But that's how it goes. That's how it goes.
So when I was in Congress, of course I was on the Ways and Means Committee, and we had a lot of discussion about Medicare, Medicaid, supplemental income. There was a study done, and of course this was 6-7 years ago, that showed if somebody took every federal government opportunity and did not go over the line, they could collect so much from this, so much from this, they could actually make $70,000 tax-free with federal subsidies. And it was one of the reasons why people weren't going to go to work, because they figured out ways to make that money. How does that hurt our economy? Do you think things like that need to change? What are your thoughts on that?
Who passes these laws in the first place? Politicians?
Representatives.
Good one. Why did they pass it in the first place? So they gain what?
Get reelected.
From whom? From the people.
Right.
And I said earlier, and I apologize, I don't mean by that way. The voter is an ignorant voter.
Oh, this is true.
I'm telling you. Ignorant voter. He believes what they say. Believe what they saw on the TV. TV is a business, and receiving money from ads and so on and so forth, they could care less. This is very important. And that's why why should I? If making $70,000, why should I work?
Right? It's one of the issues that we have to change. But if you're getting that 70,000, you don't want that to change. And if you go to the representative and say, I'm not going to vote for you if you change that. By the way, you touch my Social Security, I'm not going to change that. You touch my Medicare, I'm not going to change that. Guess what happens? Nothing changes.
Okay. There's a lot of corruption. Don't think when we have a human being, there was corruption. But you have to minimize the corruption. I know somebody in Maslin that has a restaurant. He collects food stamps. And he buys with the food stamps goods he sells in his restaurant.
These are all problems, no doubt about it.
And how many of these exist? So when the government passes something, isn't the government interested in maximizing its money as well?
Should be.
Should be, but is it doing it?
No.
That's the problem.
There is no, so in Washington, I can tell you, there was never a study on a return on investment. And when you go to the Congressional Budget Office and say, give me a summary of what this bill is going to do, they give you a summary, but here's what's interesting. They never go 10 years later and look back and say, hey, what we said 10 years ago, did that work or didn't it? That's another problem. They give you a static, they call it a static economic response to your bill, but then nobody goes back and says, wait a minute, that what you passed there didn't do what it said it was going to do. Again, another problem in Washington is that in business, I was in business for 35 years. I can tell you, if we didn't have a return on investment, the program ended, somebody could be fired. There were all kind of issues that occur. And I think Professor Ezzie's hit on an example that, the biggest problem in our economy, of course, is that political leaders want to get reelected. And you always have to remember that. So when you vote, keep that in mind.
There's a solution for that. Why don't you put term limits? People run for Congress. I mean, Queen Elizabeth served for 70 years, but O'Connor has been in Congress for 100 years. Why don't you put term limit? 5, 6, 7, 45 years?
Yeah. 78% of Americans believe in term limits, but the politicians would have to pass a lot of
But that's ridiculous. The 78% are the ones who elect the politicians.
I agree with you. So let's talk about...
Excuse me, serve for life on the Supreme Court, for life. Someone could have disease and shaking his hands while he's voting for it. Put a term limit. Give the young people a chance. The educated people to get into Congress and simply represent the people. Why do we have a term limit for the president? By the way, there's another problem in this country. If a guy gets constipated, they blame the president. There are other blames before you get to the president. They should simply come up with term limit for Congress and the Senate and so on and so forth, and judges and so on and so forth. And that would eliminate, or not eliminate, would reduce, some of the problems.
So what does the average person, what does the average household do to prepare? We know that we're in a downturn. We know that the downturn, actually, it sounds like it's going to have to get more severe before it gets better.
That's right. That's absolutely.
So what does the average household do to prepare for that?
The household would depend on his or her income. Their income determines what do they do. Now, as I said it earlier, we live in a society that we don't plan. We always live in the current. See? So my ability is, if I'm making money and I'm working, I can buy. But I don't have I don't think I have the responsibility to say I'm going to cut down on consumption because I'm going to help the U.S. economy. I think it would take care of itself. The prices will go up. It will deter people from buying because they cannot afford it, not because they don't want to. Yes, this will contribute to a higher rate of unemployment, which is the other evil, but it is managed because the compensation and so on and so forth. And the economy, if I use the expression, it's like driving in West Virginia. You go up, you go down. You go up, you go down. Over the long run, everything would be fine. But we have to accept this and tell the people that we are going through a rough time. And you're playing part of that rough time and so on and so forth. And that's where the government should come in and simply tell the people, the representatives and so on and so forth. I sent you to Washington because I don't have time to go to Washington. So you act on behalf of me, not on behalf of you. You are working for me. I'm not working for you. But it's the opposite now.
So we see that in the stock market. Many people here, we're going to ask some questions, but I'm going to finish with two things. We see that in the stock market. Many people have 401k plans. They have to prepare for this economy. Your thoughts on that? What should they be thinking? I mean, it goes up and down, but as you get older, you have less ups and downs because the road's not as long anymore.
It's not a question of thinking, guys. It's a question of ability. It's a question of ability. Now, I can think of becoming a superstar on the NFL, but I can't do it. It's the ability. And my ability is determined by my income. So I'm forced simply to drive up and down and so on and so forth. It's a question, am I able to do it or I'm thinking? And the question of ability. And as we mentioned, because now the rate of unemployment is going up, the level of incomes are going to go down. My ability to purchase will go down. And this will take care of itself, which overall will cause the prices to go down and so on and so forth.
One last thing, and then we're going to open it up for some questions. So in 2012, and the professor and I talked about this, in 2012, the Comptroller General came to my office. He was appointed by Barack Obama, a Democrat. He and I got along very, very well. He told me, and then I asked him to say this in a public hearing, and he did. He said it in a budget hearing. Comptroller General told me in 2012 that the United States was heading for a Greece-like situation within 20 years. We are now 10 years into that prediction. Are we heading into an economic situation similar to Greece? And for those of you that don't know the Greece situation, I mean, their economy collapsed. And they had to be bailed out by other economies around them. Are we heading for that, or can we survive? And what are your thoughts?
No. The United States is not Greece. If the United States will reach to that point, the whole world will collapse. This is the greatest economy on the face of the planet. There's so many economies depend on it. Secondly, we have the know-how. This economy is so large simply to do what happened to Greece. Greece is such a small country, depended heavily on export and imports. The value of its currency went down, and since they were forced to become part of the European unions, they have to abide by certain rules and so on and so forth. We are independent. We don't belong to any unions. We have our unions ourselves. By union, I don't mean workers, I mean union of states and so on and so forth. I doubt very much that the United States will reach that level. By the way, if the United States will reach that level, the whole world will collapse.
All right.